bring up Neil deGrasse Tyson. Neil's director of the Hayden Planetarium at the Rose Center in New York. And you'll also recognize he's the new host of PBS's program Nova Science Now. And Neil has something that I think will very nicely fit into what came up earlier this morning. So,
okay.
Lunch, by the way, is going to segue a little bit downtown. So I think it's going to be more like probably close to 2. But we started late. So are you okay?
Yeah, I'll survive.
Thank you.
Thank you. I flew in from New York City this morning, so it's dinner time, actually. So I'm ready. You got dinner for me here. Thank you first for this invitation to come present. And I'm familiar with many of your names and faces, and I'm even close friends with some of you out there. What I wanted to do was put some issues on the table that I have not seen commonly discussed, and that I think they ought to be front and center for these next several days. Unfortunately, I missed Professor Weinberg's talk because I tried to get here. I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning in New York City to get here, and the best I could do was halfway through. I missed your talk completely, but I got halfway.
You're forgiven.
Okay. But I learned from informants that, in fact, we have some significant overlap in our discussion of Islam from 1,000 years ago. So forgive me if I repeat some of what you might have already heard, but I'm going to bring it out anyway because there's a broader context that I want to share with you. And I'm told I have full control here. Let's see if this works. Oh, in case you're wondering, that's the Eagle Nebula. One of the few photos that you'll see that are this beautiful that are not by the Hubble telescope. This is a 1-meter telescope at Kitt Peak Observatory in Arizona, and the shape of the eagle is not discernible. It's barely discernible in this frame because the eagle is about 2 or 3 times the size of this, and the head of the eagle would be up here. So up here, and the wings off to the left and off to the right. Perhaps the most famous image of Hubble is a close-up of this zone right here, which has been variously called the pillars of creation, God's fingers, and all sorts of other sort of religious references. People feel that way when they look at images of the cosmos, of course. I was always curious, though, that in the same universe you have things like the underbelly of a tarantula, and when magnified, no one thinks religious thoughts when they make those observations, when it's part of the same universe. So, but I'll get back to that in a few moments. So here, what I want to do is I want to highlight a few issues. And these are issues that came together for an essay I wrote that appeared in Natural History magazine, the Darwin issue. It was the opening of our Darwin exhibit that is now traveling. It's no longer there at the museum. But the Darwin issue collected together stories, articles on the relevance of evolution, not only as an important concept in biology, but an important concept in all of science. And I thought long and hard about how could I possibly contribute to this, because I don't know enough biology to be meaningful in that issue. And then I realized that there are elements of, in fact, the intelligent design movement that clearly there's a lot of teeth that people attending this workshop have put into that subject. And I asked myself, do I have anything to contribute to that? And I realized that I did. And so I want to sort of fill a niche that I think is left unfilled. So let's go through. Let me first start off with Ptolemy. I don't know if we know that he really looked like this, but Ptolemy, was one of the greatest scientists ever and most influential scientists. And his most important work is, of course, Al-Majest, which is Arabic for the greatest. And in it, he sort of codifies the geocentric universe. And this Earth-centered universe prevailed for centuries until Copernicus and Galileo turned that around. But what I want to call your attention to are notes that he penned in the margin of the manuscript of his work. Let me remind you that back then, you would look up at the night sky and the planets would move against the background stars. They would wander, because that's what the word means in Greek, is wanderer. and there were 7 of these objects, the sun and moon included, and they would just kind of move. They'd go to the left, and then they'd slow down and pause, and then they'd back up, and then they'd reverse again. And this was a mystery, complete mystery. And of course, the heavens were not Earth, and so the fact that you didn't really understand what was going up there was kind of okay and expected, because that was the work of the gods. And we, being mortal down here on Earth, if you can't understand it, don't lose sleep over that fact. You perhaps never will. Now, Ptolemy had sort of the best going explanation anyone had put forth with the epicycles and the like. But nonetheless, this is the boundary between what is known and unknown about how the machinery of the universe works, and he pens these words, which for me are one of the most beautiful and poetic references to the state of one's knowledge ever written. I know that I am mortal by nature and ephemeral, but when I trace at my pleasure the windings to and fro of the heavenly bodies, I no longer touch earth with my feet. I stand in the presence of Zeus himself and take my fill of ambrosia. And so therein is this emotional, he's got this sort of religious feeling at the limits of his knowledge. And this is a trend that will continue for thousands of years to follow this. At least 2,000 years to follow this. And you don't have to, and this whole notion of intelligent design, this is intelligent design. This quote that I just read to you is Ptolemy invoking intelligent design. No, he's not trying to get that into the classroom. He's not, there's the politics of intelligent design in modern times. But what I think has been swept under the rug that we have to contend with as a community of people who are sort of truth seekers is the fact that some of the greatest minds that have preceded us have done just this, okay? That's Ptolemy. But we can go on. Who else do we have? Oh, Galileo, interesting case. Galileo was kind of an exception to this. We all know he was a deeply religious man, and a lot of the trouble he got into was because he was just kind of obnoxious, all right? He could have made nice with the Pope, and he did not. And of course, I'm paraphrasing. I mean, that's the Reader's Digest version of what happened over that period. But let me share with you some lines that he wrote to Christina, who was the Grand Duchess of Tuscany. Some of these quotes you've heard before, but I think they're worth taking to heart. The Bible tells you how to go to heaven and not how the heavens go. That's one of the famous quotes attributed to Galileo. Another one is, I don't feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with senses, reason, and intellect has intended us to forego their use. And so he was kind of I see him as one of the first to say, all right, if religion has if there's any point and purpose to it, it's not to serve as a science textbook. Okay, so he was kind of the first to suggest this division, not to get rid of religion. Of course, like I said, he was a religious fellow himself. But it gets interesting when we get sort of philosophically interesting when we get to this gentleman. I can back up here. Sir Isaac Newton. Now, I don't know what you know of Isaac Newton, but everything I've read of his tells me that there's no greater genius to ever walk the surface of this earth. I'm just I don't know if you've ever felt that about anybody. I didn't feel that about anybody. But you just read what this man wrote, okay? Line by line by line. This guy was plugged into the machinery of the universe. I think he's unimpeachably brilliant. Unimpeachably brilliant. And let me read again what we heard from Mike Shermer earlier. In Isaac Newton's writings, by the way, in his Principia, here's the page 1, page 0 of Principia, in it, he discovers the laws of motion, F equals ma, discovers the laws of gravity. It's all there. And he did this all before he turned 26. And in this, when he talks about motion, there's no reference to God. When he talks about his two-body force that he deduced, this universal law of gravitation, there is no mention of God. It's just not anywhere there because he understood it. He was on top of it. He was there. Even though the understanding of the motions of the planets before he came along was given unto God because nobody understood it, or nobody understood well enough to really believe that they had a full predictive handle on it in the way the universal law of gravitation supplied. And so what you have is Isaac Newton abandoning reference to God until he realizes that if all you do is calculate the two-body problem, here we have like the moon and Earth. Yes, he's got that calculated. Now you have the sun and the Earth. You got that. But wait a minute, now the Earth